It's a tool. It's like Microsoft Business Intelligence. It's a tool of, it's a combination of 3 tools like SSIS, SSRS, and SSAS. SQL Server Integration Services, SQL Server Reporting Services, and SQL Server Analysis Services. Okay, so before going to this MSBI, I would like to ask a few questions with respect to that databases, so why we need to have a database. So what was the need of a database? Can anyone of you try to explain it? So what was the need of a database? So where exactly we can use these databases?
Yeah. So database is mainly used to store large amounts of data for analyzing it and getting making decisions or related to the data stored. So when you have huge amount of data, it's better to store on a database.
Okay. So as you said, so databases can be utilized to store the data, and on top of this data, you're going to do some data analytics, or else you're going to analyze your information with the help of databases, right? So again, so how we are going to load this data into databases? So to load this data into databases, so we might rely on certain applications, or we might rely on a certain amount of tools. Okay, so that depends on the users of the database. This database has been categorized or classified into 2 types: transactional database and data warehousing database. So for example, what is transactional database? What exactly, what kind of data we were going to store under this database? So basically, if you take any application, like any kind of business, for example, let's talk about e-commerce applications like Amazon or Flipkart or any other e-commerce applications. So as an end user, what exactly we're trying to do? So you're trying to do some kind of, first you can create your profile, and after that you can select your required goods, and then you can place an order, and based on that they can deliver it, and then you'll do the payment options. So to implement all these activities, so we need to have a repository, or else we need to have a storage location. So that storage location is nothing but a database. It might be any kind of database. It might be SQL Server database, or Oracle, or Sybase, DB2, Teradata, whatever the database it is. So here, you're going to store your information. So, but what kind of data we can store it here? So that depends on users again. So so if you consider transactional database, so here all the live transactions you're going to be captured and then storing under transactional database. Okay, so let me ask you a simple scenario again. So if databases are not available, so how we are going to store the data? If the database are not available, so you might store your data under file system, or else so you're going to be stored in an Excel file format or flat file format. You can store it. So so those systems doesn't doesn't have proper security, and they won't avoid any duplicate data, or else mostly so they won't store huge amount of information. So due to that reason only, we are relying on RDBMS products, right? So again, once we came back to the RDBMS products also, so why this has been divided into 2 types? So transactional database and data warehousing. So what was the need of transactional database or data warehousing databases here? Because let us assume I have an e-commerce application saying that Amazon application out there. Okay, so throughout the world, so number of users are connecting to this database, and if you are trying to maintain 1 year data or 5 years data into transactional database, what will happen is, so your application performance is going to become very poor. So because of high volume of the data is presenting at a database, so millions of records it's going to be stored under a database, transactional database. So hence what will happen, so you have to reduce the data which is presenting under transactional database. So how do we reduce it? So if I delete the data from a transactional database, instead of keeping 1 month, 1 year data into a transactional database, if I maintain only 1 month data and rest of data, if I'm deleting it, what will happen? Hello, here I'm asking a small question, so for example, So if I maintain a huge amount of historical data, my web application is going to be perform very poor performance. It's providing very poor performance. So in that particular scenario, what will happen? So I'm going to keep only 1 month data into transactional database. Rest of data I'm deleting on daily basis. So in this scenario, what will happen? So Amazon decision makers or else Amazon business people, they cannot do any kind of data analysis. So due to lack of data, so they are having only 1 month data. By seeing that only 1 month data, so they cannot take any kind of decisions. So like they doesn't have any proper decision making system. So due to lack of data. So hence, so what we need to do? So before deleting any data from the transactional database, so we are loading this data from transactional database to some historical location. So that historical location is nothing but data warehousing systems. So that means, so at the end of the day, or else that depends on the frequency of the data. So we might be do the daily loadings, or else we might implement weekly loadings, or we might implement monthly loadings. So we can move the data from transactional database to data warehousing systems. Correct. So like, so to implement this particular process, or else like, so I mean, to load the data from transactional database to data warehousing system, so we need to follow certain amount of process. So process or mechanism. Let me explain like this. So one of my source system is SQL Server. One of my source system is SQL Server. One of the source system is .NET. Sorry. One of the source system is Oracle database, and one of my source system is having Sybase DB, and one of the source system is having Teradata. And so in one location, one geographic location, my client is providing Excel file format as a source and flat files. So flat files in terms of CSV, or we can call it as a raw files or DAT files, whatever it may be. So they like all these kind of files we can call it as a flat files. Text files is also one of the source. Okay. So our ultimate goal is, so we have to pull the data from these many source systems and need to populate this data into data warehousing database. So just assume, so this has been maintained by Microsoft SQL Server. Okay. So just assume, so Amazon is having like, so the huge business throughout the world, and they're like, so it depends on the geographic region, or else depends on the business need. So they are maintaining different kinds of source systems, like SQL Server is one of the source, or Oracle or Sybase, Teradata or Excel or flat files. Like so they're having different kinds of source systems. Our objective is, so we need to pull the data from all these source systems, need to populate this data into data warehousing. So what was the significance of data warehouse here? So the significance of data warehouse system is, so here we are going to be keep the historical data, and it might be 1 year or 5 years or 10 years, that depends on your client need. So we are going to be keep like all these historical information over here, and on top of this historical information only, you're trying to generate your reports, or else you can do some data analytics on top of it, right? So then now here you have a question like, how can I move this data from transactional database to data warehousing system? So to address this question, so like we have a process or mechanism called ETL, right? So ETL stands for extraction, transformation, and loading. Extraction, transformation, and loading. So that means what exactly I'm trying to do? I'm trying to extract the data from these many source systems, and I can load this data into data warehousing database, which is maintained by MS SQL Server. So it might be any database. It might be Oracle or Sybase DB2. Only one system we are going to maintain over here. That depends on your client need. Okay. So in between extraction and loading, so here we have a word called transformation. So what kind of transformations we are doing here? So the significance of transformations is, so before loading data into target tables, So we are going to be implement, or else we are going to do certain amount of modifications on the data. So that we can call it as a transformations. For example, what kind of transformations we can do? Say, for example, in my source system, I have a column name called sal column. So this is my source column. So the target table is also having same sal column. And along with this, so target table is required one more column name called annual salary. ANN cell, right? So what do you mean by annual salary here? So here it is a calculation. Here we were doing some calculation, so that is nothing but sal multiplied by 12. So these kind of columns we can call it as a derived columns or calculative columns. So to implement this kind of derived columns or calculative columns, so we are going to rely on transformations, right? So using transformation, you can able to add some calculative fields to the target. And apart from this, so what are the other activities we can able to do with the help of transformations? So with the help of transformations, you can able to do some case conversions, you can convert your uppercase text into lowercase format, and you can able to do concatenation between one column to other columns, so multiple columns you can combine and generate one unique column. For example, your source feed is providing in terms of first name, last name, and middle name format, and your target table is required full name. So in that case, we are going to be concatenate all these three columns, and then we can load them into target table request. Okay, so like this, we can able to do certain amount of modifications on the data, so and we can load them into target. So that this is one of the requirement is adding calculative fields or derived fields. What else we have? Say for example, your client source feed is contain 100 records. Out of 100 records, 80 records are valid records and 20 records are corrupted records. So in this particular case, so we have to consider only 80 records and load them into target system, and rest of records you might be ignore, or else we can revert back this data to the client again. So they can do the validations and then they can correct the data, and then they can produce that one more data in the next ETL load. Okay, so that means you can able to do the data cleansing activities. So if the valid data itself only we need to populate to the target system. And apart from these two activities, so third activity is adding audit fields to the target. Say for example, you'd like to analyze who is processing this data, at what time this data is processed, on which machine it is running. So to capture such kind of information, we can call it as a auditing, or else we can call it as a audit fields. So you can able to add some audit fields to the target with the help of transformations again. And so these are the normal activities, so data cleansing, adding new fields, column modifications, and adding auditing. So apart from this, so we can able to a certain amount of logging. So so say for example, you're trying to populate 5 source table data into 5 different tables. So if you try to capture so how long each table is running, so how many records are processed, so how many bad records are processed today, how many valid records are processed today, so what was the revenue generated from each from such a certain amount of product level, some store level, geographic level. So if you try to capture high level audit information, or else we can call it as a high level reconciliation data, so that is also possible with the help of transformations again. And so sometimes we might convert the rows data into columns or column headers into rows. So these kind of options we can call it as a pivoting and unpivoting. So that is also possible with the help of transformations again. So finally, the conclusion of the transformation is, so using transformations, you're going to do certain amount of modifications on your data, and finally you can populate them into the target table, and well cleaned and so required amount of calculated fields you can populate to the target. Okay, so combination of these three words, extraction, transformation, and loading, it's a mechanism or process. To implement this ETL process or mechanism, so there is so many tools are available in the market. Say for example, Informatica, Ab initio, DataStage, Talent. So like this, different tools are available. So if we come to Microsoft area, so here we have a tool called SSIS. Using SQL Server integration services, you can able to implement ETL process or ETL mechanism. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay, so so you so you can able to understand so what is SSIS, right? So using SSIS on day-to-day activities is, so you might have certain amount of transactional source systems. You can do some modifications on your data, and finally you can load them into your target system. So this is the activity which you're trying to do with the help of SSIS. Okay, so now let's come back to the SSRS. In SSRS case, what exactly we're trying to do? So once we populated this data, just let me show you one thing. Just give me a second, let me open this. Okay, so this is my database, and here I have a data like this. So some employees information out there. There are 14 employee details are presenting under this database. Okay, so if my client wants to identify how many departments are presenting under each department, so in this case, as a developer, I can write a query like this. Group by department. So here I'm getting an output like so 10th department 3 employees are available, 20th department 5 employees, 30th department 6 employees are available. So in this case, I'm getting an output, but so how can I produce this information to my user or else to my end user? If I take this output and then copy and paste it in Excel file, so that is like ad hoc request, like one time basis I can able to do it. But like so like this user might have lots and lots of queries out there. So he will ask any number of queries, and we need to write a SQL queries, or else we need to write some stored procedures. Based on that, we are going to generate certain amount of outputs. So those outputs you cannot state through SQL agent or else any other database tools. So we need to visualize them. So we need to generate so we need to create some look and fields of the data. I mean, so we need to assign some proper headers, and we need to represent the data in terms of tabular format or cross-tabulated format or charts format, right? And we can able to add some so some headers and footers to the report, and we can add certain amount of images to the report. So we are going to be visualize the data or else in terms of a report format, and those reports we can deliver to the user in terms of a PDF file format or Excel file format, or we can generate certain amount of applications on top of the data, and that application access we can provide it to the end users. To achieve this mechanism, so we need to rely on reporting tools. So what are the reporting tools available in the market, like MicroStrategy, Crystal reports, Jasper reports, and Tableau, ClickView. So like this, there are so many reporting tools available. So again, so if you come to Microsoft area again, so here MSBI is producing a reporting tool called SSRS, SQL Server Reporting Services. Using this reporting tool, you can able to generate certain reports, and you can you can prepare some data sets. So data sets are nothing but the queries which we are writing like this. So you might write direct select statements on the data, or else you might do some aggregations on the data. You might create certain amount of stored procedures to pull the data from various tables, and that information you're going to be generated in terms of a report format, visualization format. So to do this activity, so here we have a tool called SSRS. Using SSRS reports, you're going to visualize the data. Okay, So let me explain a simple life cycle of SSRS report. So in SSRS report, basically so what exactly we can do. So first of all, we need to connect a database. So connecting to the database, we can call it as a data source. Data source creation. It contains server name, username and password, and database name. So these are the four credentials or four activities we need to define under data source. Data source contains credentials of your source system. So what are the credentials we are going to define here? So server name, authentications like either Windows authentication or SQL Server authentication we need to select, and then we have to select a database. Next one, second activity is data set. Data set. So data sets are nothing but, so you are going to write a SQL queries, or you can prepare some stored procedures, and we can call that stored procedure as a data set into SSRS report. And third activity is, so we are going to generate a report on top of your data set. On top of the report, on top of your data set, you're going to generate a report, or nowadays we can call it as a visualizations, right? So those visualizations you can create in terms of a tabular format or matrix format, or any charts or images, drill down reports, drill through reports, and sub reports. So like this, different kinds of naming notations available. So using those visualizations, you are going to generate a reports on top of your data sets. And what else? What are the other activities we can able to do? So once we generate the reports, we can deploy these reports into certain location, and from that location, so end users, they are going to generate their own reports. To say, so they can access those reports, and then they can export this data into Excel file format or PDF file format, or else any other exported formats they're going to be exported. And so that means, so report access. And next one is, so we can schedule and automate those reports. Say for example, if your user wants to see a PDF file formatted data on daily basis every day 9 a.m. So when he is stepping to the office, he would like to see the data in terms of a PDF file format. So for that, we can automate the reports, so that we can call it as a subscriptions, right? So using subscriptions, we can able to automate the reports. And apart from the subscriptions, we can provide web access to the users, and we can able to provide so deliverable formats, like in terms of PDF and Excel file formats also, we can able to do the deliverables. Is this clear? Any questions on the reports? SSRS side. So once we're done with our SSRS session, so you're in a position to generate certain amount of reports, and you're in a position to schedule and automate those reports. Okay, so this is the activity, and so your entire SSRS session is roaming around in between these 5 activities: data source creations, data sets, visualization, and then deployment of the reports, and then subscriptions. So these are the activities, major activities we are trying to do as part of SSRS development activities. Okay, so now using SSIS and using SSRS, you can able to do the data loading, as well as you can able to do the implementations. To say visualizations also you can able to implement. But then what is the need of SSAS here? So SSAS is playing so different key roles. Say for example, as we discussed earlier, after connecting to the database, your second activity is data set creations. Okay, so your end users always requested to see the data, they don't want to see the detailed level information, so they need to see summarized or aggregative information they would like to see, right? So as part of that, so say for example, I have a table with the name of fact internet sales, which is having 100 million records. Out of 100 million records, I would like to analyze product level total sales for each day, or else daily total sales for each product. So to achieve that, I can write certain amount of SQL query. So that SQL query might run 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depends on the volume of the data which we were handling. So hence, what will happen if one report, so one query is taking 10 minutes. So within the report you are writing 3 or 4 queries, automatically, so the report execution time become very high. So it might take 30 minutes, or else it might take 45 minutes. So depends on the volume of the data, report is taking longer than expected time. So in that time frames, what we can do, so if you provide such kind of reports to the end users, so they cannot rely on your reports and they cannot utilize it, right? So that means, like, so when we are getting facing this issue, so when we're trying to generate any kind of data set preparations, when we're trying to write any kind of stored procedures, so according to the volume, or else according to the aggregate functions which you are utilizing, according to the filters you are using in the stored proc, so it might take longer than expected. So that means, so we have to provide efficient and then, like, high performance reports to the end users. So in such scenarios, what we can do is, we have to rely on a concept called SQL Server Analysis Services. So using SQL Server Analysis Services, you can able to generate two different cubes, multi-dimensional cubes and tabular formatted cubes. And so once the data is populated to the cubes, so in the cubes, like, all the aggregative information is going to be populated into the cube, and you can able to simply extract the data from that aggregative information. So you don't need to calculate in the real-time scenarios. So that means, like, so when we are trying to run the reports in the daytime, so you no need to run it. So in the overnight ETL process itself only, you can refresh your cubes. So from the cubes, if you generate the reports, so those reports will produce, like, so efficient report performance, or else they can produce the report data on time. So hence, so with the help of analysis services, you are going to be generate either OLAP databases or two-dimensional cubes also you can able to generate. On top of the cubes, if you generate any kind of reports, so those reports will give us better performance. So this is the overall uses of MSBI. So using MSBI, you can able to implement reporting. I mean to say, you can able to implement ETL process or ETL mechanism with the help of SSIS. With the help of SSRS, you can able to generate the reports on data warehousing database directly. So if you face any kind of performance related issues, so in that case, we can rely on analysis services cubes. And using analysis services cubes, you can able to store aggregative data, and on top of the aggregate data, you're going to generate your reports for the sake of data analysis purpose, right? So this is how we can able to utilize this complete MSBI tool. Okay, so prerequisite for this tool is, so you need to have some hands-on experience on SQL Server side. So writing SQL queries, understanding the joins, understanding, like, aggregate functions, all the functions, like, all built-in functions available in SQL Server, you need to understand. So that is a prerequisite, and rest of things are, it's a tool level, like, so you can easily learn from you can easily learn either SSIS or SSRS or analysis services. Okay, so this is how we can able to do this. I mean, understand this MSBI course. And on top of it, like, instead of SSRS, most of the people nowadays, they're utilizing Power BI as well. So few customers are using Power BI, few customers still they are using SSRS, other reporting tools also they're utilizing. Any questions so far?